So Week 5 of the NFL season featured 5 comeback wins when NFL teams were trailing by 10 or more points. One of these games involved a bit of a meltdown from a head coach who could be seen screaming at a player on the sideline after said player made one of the most costly mistakes you could ever make in a game. And that was far from the only surprising upset of this week's game. So let's break down all the biggest surprises and most intriguing takeaways from every Week 5 NFL game on Sunday right after. All right, first up, for the second week in a row, the Sunday slate was kicked off by the Vikings playing an AFC North team overseas. Last week, it was the Steelers in Dublin, and yesterday, it was the Cleveland Browns in London. Dillon Gabriel ended up making his NFL debut, and I thought he was pretty solid overall. He took good care of the football. It was pretty clear, though, the game plan was to get the ball out quickly, then pound the rock with Quinshon Judkins. Gabriel was 12 of 17 on quick passes for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, both to tight ends. Judkins, meanwhile, continues to impress. He topped 100 yards for the first time this season and is 9th in rushing yards throughout the league, which is pretty crazy considering he missed all of training camp, and I actually thought Cleveland was going to end up getting this W, but Carson Wentz led an impressive game-winning drive in which he was 9 for 9 with 71 yards and a 12-yard touchdown throw to Jordan Addison. Addison, by the way, was held out for the entire first quarter by Kevin O'Connell after he, I think, missed a team walkthrough that week, and at least that's what's being shared around. So he went from being in the doghouse to being the hero in the end of this game. The real heroes, though, might be the entire Vikings O-line. They were without their starting left guard, starting and backup center, with their starting center, Ryan Kelly, recently being placed on IR after suffering his second concussion of the season, and sadly does have a pretty extensive history of them throughout his career. Anyway, after that, it was their starting right tackle, Brian O'Neill, out of this game as well. So the backups played pretty well, all things considered. Carson Wentz did take 3 sacks, but that is a lot better than the 6 he took last week. And get this, Myles Garrett was limited to just 2 pressures on 35 pass rushes. That's his second lowest pressure rate in a game since 2021. That allowed Carson to find his weapons, including Justin Jefferson, who had 123 yards and is 3rd in receiving despite playing with multiple quarterbacks and a makeshift offensive line. Minnesota now moves to 3-2 as they head into their bye, while the Browns drop to 1-4 and now play the Steelers next week in Pittsburgh. The Steelers were on a bye this week, and I don't know if the Ravens also thought they were on a bye this week or what, but this team struggled mightily once again on Sunday. Now, granted, they were without Lamar Jackson, Cooper Rush filled in, and a ton of defensive players like safety Kyle Hamilton, no Roquan Smith, or Marlon Humphrey. Nnamdi Madubuike is on IR for the season as well, so they were far from full strength, okay? But they didn't even put up a fight as the Texans obliterated them 44-10, and coming into this game, this was one of the lowest powered offenses in all of football. Well, that's a new franchise record for points scored on the road by the Texans, and they can thank C.J. Stroud, who threw for 244 yards and 4 touchdowns, as the Texans scored on all 8 possessions he was in the game until Davis Mills eventually relieved him. It's hard to take too much away from this game with Lamar and so many other Ravens sitting out, but the reality is Baltimore is now 1-4, and out of 253 teams that have started with that record, only 15 of them have gone on to make the playoffs, so about 6%. Well, now they play the Rams next week, with Lamar expected to miss that one as well. And if they go 1-5, you can just about write them off already for the rest of the season. You can also write off the Jets, most likely, who are the only team left in the NFL that haven't won a single game. The Cowboys sliced up New York's defense like a knife through hot butter as Dak threw 4 touchdown passes, and Javonte Williams added another on the ground with 135 yards to go with it. And shout out to Ryan Flournoy, a receiver who's essentially been a practice squad guy, but had to step up with CeeDee Lamb and Kevontae Turpin being out. Well, step up he did as he led the team in receiving with 6 catches for 114 yards. Jake Ferguson is also on fire to start the season. He added another 2 touchdowns yesterday and became just the 4th tight end in NFL history with at least 40 or more catches in his team's first 5 games of the season. It didn't matter that they had only 1 regular starter playing on their offensive line. They still dominated 37-22. Not a great start for Aaron Glenn, who became the first coach in franchise history to begin his tenure with 5 the losses. I would have thought their defense would be a bit more stout with a defensive-minded coach like Glenn, but nope. They're allowing over 31 points per game and are the first team in NFL history to not have a single defensive takeaway in their first 5 games. That is obviously not good, and neither is Justin Fields' 0-26 record when the opposing team scores 21 or more. That is actually insane, and it's safe to say the Aaron Glenn, Justin Fields experiment is off to a pretty disastrous start in New York. The other New York team didn't look a whole lot better yesterday either. Jackson Dart had a rough go against the Saints with 2 interceptions and a fumble as they lost 26-14 and dropped to 1-4 on the year. They actually started out hot, scoring touchdowns on their first 2 drives, which gave them an early 14-3 lead, but 5 turnovers, that's enough to kill any team, and that's what allowed New Orleans to score 23 unanswered points. They joined the Giants at 1-4 with that win, by the way, and that was also Spencer Rattler's first career victory as a starter. He's now 1-10, so that's good. At least you're starting somewhere, okay? His best play of the day came in the second quarter when he hit Rashid Shaheed deep down the field, who raced in for an 87-yard touchdown. That was the Saints' longest offensive play since 2016. Shaheed was moving on that play as well, reaching 21.72 miles per hour, which is the fastest speed reached on a touchdown this season. You know what makes it even better? The fact that he didn't drop the football before crossing the goal line. Believe it or not, but we saw yet another player make the same boneheaded mistake that we just watched Adonai Mitchell do last week. This time it was Cardinals running back Amari DiMercato, who had a walk-in 71-yard touchdown that would have put Arizona up 28-6 in the fourth quarter. But nope, he tossed the ball, letting go of it before breaking the plane. I mean, it was close, but he did let go of it before. So that was actually a touchback. And that, of course, would have basically been game over, but the Titans got the ball back and scored on that very next possession. And before I get to where things got even crazier, head coach Jonathan Gannon could be seen screaming at DiMercato on the sideline shortly after that happened, even appearing to knock into him or punch him as he walked away. Maybe a little too much from the head coach, in my opinion, but it was a very costly mistake indeed, to which DiMercato said after the game, "I made a mistake. There's really no excuse. I was obviously emotional. It was a big play, but I just got to be smarter." Well, I can almost guarantee you this. He'll probably never make that mistake again. Anyway, after DiMercato's touchback was turned into a 6-play, 80-yard touchdown drive by the Titans, here's where it gets even more insane. Tennessee forced a 3-and-out and got the ball back, and they were driving until Cam Ward's pass was deflected and picked off, but not so fast because the defender lost control of the ball, so fumbled, with it getting batted around, kicked, and it rolled into the end zone with Tyler Lockett managing to fall on it for a Titans touchdown. Unreal. 2 of the craziest plays you will ever see, and somehow the Titans were down by only 2. They then forced another Cardinals punt, drove 71 yards down the field to set up a Joey Sly chip shot game-winning field goal, with Tennessee getting their first win of the season. They didn't really have any business winning this one, but Arizona gave it away and lost in gut-wrenching fashion. To add insult to injury, the Cardinals became the first team in the Super Bowl era to lose on a walk-off field goal with the time expiring in 3 consecutive games. That's a bitter pill to swallow, especially after starting out 2-0. And then let's talk some Commanders and Chargers, because it was LA that was in complete control for most of the first half. They scored on their first 2 drives of the game, and that also featured a pretty electric 41-yard scramble by Justin Herbert. Meanwhile, they limited Jaden Daniels and company to just 1 first down on their first 2 drives while stacking up a 10-0 lead. From there, though, momentum shifted when a Quentin Johnston fumble turned into a big 74-yard drive, capped off by a 15-yard TD run from Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, aka Bill, who had a heck of a day with 150 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns. After that drive, the Commanders proceeded to do nothing but score points on every drive. Sans won the rest of the game. Bill actually fumbled at the top of the fourth quarter, went up 20-10, which did give the Chargers a little bit of life. But after driving down the field, Herbert's pass was tipped and picked off near the goal line, and Washington delivered a 99-yard drive kill shot via a Deebo Samuel tutty to fully put this one out of reach. 27 unanswered points in a game, and that really shows you if you execute at a high level, you win. The Chargers had chances to do just that, but they were flagged 10 times for 85 yards and lost the turnover battle 2-1. And that's not even to mention one of those penalties was a massive momentum shifter because Ladd McConkey caught a punt and housed it. A very impressive punt return turned house call that got negated after a roughing the punter penalty, and that would have put the Chargers up 17-7, but instead Washington got a field goal out of that drive. LA suffered even more injuries, with a notable one being to their other running back after Najee Harris is out for the season, and this time it was Omarion Hampton leaving in the second half with an ankle injury, and I don't think it's season ending or anything like that, but he's going to be out for a little bit here, seen in a walking boot after the game. And then Trey Pipkins, one of their offensive linemen, got banged up and did return to finish out this game. However, it's safe to say their O-line is an absolute shambles. You have Rashawn Slater out for the year. Joe Alt is hurt right now, and because of that, Herbert was sacked 4 times on 12 pressures, taking 9 quarterback hits. 1.5 of those sacks, by the way, was from veteran pass rusher Von Miller. I forgot he was on the Commanders, not going to lie to you. But yikes, Herbert has been sacked 16 times now in 5 games and is currently the most pressured quarterback in the NFL. That is obviously not sustainable long-term here if the Chargers want to win the division or make it back to the playoffs. So LA falls to 3-2 on the year, their second loss in a row after rattling off 3 straight wins against AFC West opponents. But something worth noting here is that Keenan Allen, who led the room with 5 snags for 58 yards, became the fastest player in NFL history to rack up 1,000 career receptions, doing so in just 159 games. I'm sure he doesn't really care about that stat and would prefer a win yesterday instead, but the Commanders had a great bounce-back W after losing to Atlanta last week. The return of Jaden Daniels was very helpful. Deebo Samuel had a DAY without Scary Terry in the lineup, just 4 yards shy of 100 receiving yards total, catching 8 of his 11 targets. And then Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was a huge standout as well, as I've already mentioned. Another AFC West team lost yesterday, although it wasn't really surprising as the Raiders got absolutely obliterated by the Indianapolis Colts, 6-40. This was the largest margin of victory for the Colts since 2013, by the way, and they moved to 4-1 on the year. The Raiders, on the other hand, are the inverse. They lost their 4th straight game, falling to 1-4, with the Geno Smith experience not being a great one. He leads the league in interceptions right now with 9, throwing 2 yesterday and 5 in the last 2 games. He's currently on pace to throw 20 touchdowns and 31 interceptions by season's end, and this Raiders team is really struggling once again. They were 0-4 in the red zone. Geno had those 2 picks. Indy even blocked a punt and turned that into a touchdown a few plays later, and it was never even close. Sure, their top 2 tight ends didn't play, talking about Vegas, but aside from running back Ashton Genty, this team does not have much of a bright spot, especially when Brock Bowers is not out there on the field. Genty, though, had 5 catches for 42 yards and 14 carries for 67 more, which is about all you can ask for or hope for from your starting running back. The Colts have quite the running back on their side of the ball as well, with Jonathan Taylor rushing 17 times for 66 yards and 3 touchdowns. Indiana Jones had himself another great day, managing the game well, throwing for just over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. One of those was on a scramble in the red zone and was an absolute dot to Michael Pittman. That O-line looked great as well, not allowing a single sack, which actually broke the Raiders' 40-game streak of having at least one, and it's very safe to say the Daniel Jones resurgence is in full effect. The game got weird for both teams in this one on special teams. Their kicker, Spencer Schrader, suffered what appeared to be a serious knee injury, and then Raiders punter A.J. Cole got carted to the locker room after that punt got blocked. Because of that, Indy went for a 2-point try 4 times, converting half of them, and I can't lie, Indy looks like legit playoff contenders right now. I know it's very early, but they've won 3 games this year by 20 or more, and probably shoulda, coulda, woulda, I know, but should have been 5-0, could have been 5-0 if not for A.D. Mitchell costing them 2 touchdowns last week in their first and only loss of the season. But hey, if you thought the Raiders were bad, the Bengals without Joe Burrow are definitely worse than expected here. Don't get me wrong, if you lose your starting quarterback for most of, if not the entire season, I don't expect great things, but Jake Browning was at least serviceable a couple years ago when he took over for Burrow. This year, though, he's already thrown more picks in 4 games than he did in 9 games back in 2023. Right now, Browning is behind only Geno Smith himself with 8 interceptions, and honestly, the score final score at least doesn't show how bad this game against the Detroit Lions really was. It was 28-3 near the end of the third quarter, with Cincinnati doing nothing on offense for the first 3 quarters aside from punting and Browning throwing 3 picks. They caught a little fire in the fourth quarter though, putting up 3 straight touchdown drives, which was great, but in between that, Detroit scored another touchdown to make it 35-17 with 5 minutes left in the game. So again, this game was never really within reach, and some of those touchdowns I kind of considered garbage time tutties. Anyway, Jamar Chase finished with 6 catches for 110 yards in those 2 late game touchdowns. That's a positive for him. Meanwhile, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Laporta each had 100 yards receiving or very close to it for Detroit. Since he continues to have absolutely no run game either, which doesn't help when you are trailing by so much. And with that, the Bengals lose their 3rd straight game, with all of them being blowouts and fans wanting them to make a move for another quarterback, like maybe famous Jameis, as Browning continues to struggle. The Lions, however, won their 4th game in a row. They lost the season opener to the Packers, but have since rattled off 4 straight W's and currently have the most high-powered offense in all of football, averaging 34.8 points per game through the first 5 weeks. They are top 3 in the red zone as well, with Jared Goff only throwing 4 incompletions in this game and rattling off 3 more touchdowns to add to his 9 heading into the game. So right now he has 12 touchdown passes to just 2 interceptions. David Montgomery threw a touchdown pass of his own, plus ran one in, while his partner in crime, Jahmyr Gibbs, had a receiving touchdown, and that actually makes for the 14th game that these two have scored a touchdown in the same game, tying an NFL record. Aiden Hutchinson continues to be a bright spot on that D-line after coming off that brutal season-ending leg injury last year, and he recorded 8 pressures against the Bengals, but is the only player in the league so far this season with at least 7 pressures and a sack in 3 different games. So that's the good. The bad for their defense, Detroit lost cornerback Terry and Arnold to a potentially long-term shoulder injury. They were already down DJ Reed as well as Ennis Rakestraw. Both were on IR. So that means the secondary is going to be a little light when they face the Chiefs here this upcoming week. Next up, to get back to another AFC West team, the Broncos upset the Philadelphia Eagles in pretty wild fashion because Philly was up 17-3 with just a couple minutes left in the third quarter and then proceeded to implode on both sides of the football. Their offense went 3 plays, negative 16 yards, punt, 3 plays, negative 6 yards, punt, 3 plays, 2 yards, punt, and then they couldn't get it done on the final drive when trailing by 4. It was a failed Hail Mary attempt. Their defense, on the other hand, struggled as Denver rallied and scored back-to-back touchdown drives, with the second one ending in a bold 2-point conversion to bring them up 18-17 rather than an extra point just tying it at 17 all. Their final drive resulted in a Will Lutz 36-yarder to bring them up 4 rather than 3, so the 2-pointer paid off because it was now a 4-point game, 21-17, and that ended up getting them the W after, again, on that final drive, the Eagles tried an unsuccessful Hail Mary as time expired. This was the first loss in a game where Jalen Hurts was the starter since September 29th, 2024, by the way. Pretty crazy, and there were opportunities to win this one for the Eagles. Hurts overthrew A.J. Brown because A.J. Brown slowed up on his route on a deep ball in the third that probably would have been a walk-in touchdown, and they ended up punting on that drive instead. Then a deep ball to Devontae Smith on 4th and 4 late in the fourth was negated by an illegal shift on Saquon Barkley, and that turned into a Philly punt. The play before the Hail Mary had some contact from a Broncos DB as Hurts tried to target his tight end. I was kind of fine there with the no call. I mean, I would have also been fine with it if they flagged it, to be fair. It didn't seem egregious to me in the moment, but Cole, you don't care about that flag because you just want the Eagles to lose. Well, no, it would actually have been better for the Chiefs if the Broncos lost, but I digress. Either way, Philly didn't execute at a high enough level, and the Broncos ended up getting it done, winning on the road after playing a pretty rough 3 quarters, to be honest, but coming alive late in the game and getting it done. After all, it takes 4 quarters to win a football game, and that is exactly what Denver did. Their star pass rusher, Nick Bonito, had another great game, racking up 2.5 sacks alone in this one, and he is now first in the NFL in sacks with 7, as well as first in the NFL with pressures. He's got 31, yet is tied for 25th in pass rush snaps with only 109. Basically, this man is an animal and an absolute problem. Courtland Sutton is a problem of his own on offense. He finished just 1 yard shy of 100 receiving yards, the leader by far, as was Devontae Smith for Philly, who also caught 8 passes, but for 114 yards. Saquon was next, catching 3 passes for 58 yards, including a pretty impressive 47-yarder up the right side for a touchdown, but he had just 6 carries for 30 yards on the ground, and that is probably way less attempts than ideal for Saquon, considering the Eagles were up for the majority of that game. Their O-line is a little bit banged up, so I'm sure that affected things a bit, but have no fear, because sure, they suffered their first loss of the year. They should have a pretty nice bounce-back game, though, on Thursday Night Football this week against the Giants here in a few days. At least I think it would be a bounce-back game, considering they're probably going to be pretty heavily favored. And then the Dolphins lost in a painful way as well after leading by 17 points in the first half over the Panthers. Miami found a lot of success through the air, 256 yards and 3 touchdowns from Tua, but this game was won on the ground by the Panthers both offensively and defensively. They shut down Miami's rushing attack, holding them to just 19 yards on 14 carries, which is obviously not great at all for the Dolphins. On the flip side, Rico Dowdle went nuclear with Chuba Hubbard out. This man rushed for 206 yards and a touchdown, by far his career high in rushing yards and the most by any player this season. It's also the second highest rushing total in franchise history, and what makes it even crazier is that he had to leave the game multiple times as he was dealing with some cramping. This win brought Carolina to 2-3, and they've got a date with the Cowboys next Sunday. The Dolphins, though, they are now 1-4, and they host the Chargers next week. I'm not sure they win that one, so they're probably looking at 1-5. I think Mike McDaniel's days are most likely numbered here in Miami, and if they keep losing, I would be shocked if he made it to their bye in Week 12. Now, these next 2 matchups were 2 of the best games of the entire weekend. Let's start with Bucs and Seahawks. This was the battle of the first and third overall picks from the 2018 draft, with Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold going head-to-head in basically a very electric shootout. 2 guys that sputtered earlier in their careers with bad teams, but have both seen a bit of a renaissance in the last few years, especially Baker Mayfield, but then also the last year and a half for Sam Darnold. Both of these guys were lights out as well. They combined for a whopping 720 yards and just 10 incompletions. Baker was 29 of 33 for 379 yards and 2 touchdowns. His 87.9% completion rate is the best of any quarterback so far this year. Darnold, meanwhile, was 28 of 34 and had 341 yards with 4 touchdowns. However, when the game was tied at 35 apiece with a minute to go, the Seahawks had a chance to go kick a game-winning field goal, but Darnold's pass deflected off of a defensive lineman's helmet, and Levante David came up with the huge interception that set up Chase McLaughlin's game-winning field goal. Tampa won it 38-35. And this is wild because the Bucs became the first team in NFL history with 4 wins in their first 5 games that were decided by 3 points or less. Meanwhile, the Seahawks have lost by a combined 7 points in their 2 losses, and the way this one unfolded at the end has to sting. Their defense has allowed the 3rd fewest points entering the game, but they were without DeMarcus Lawrence, Julian Love, and Devin Witherspoon, 3 starters along that defense, which had an impact for sure, but I think it evened out because the Bucs did what they did without Bucky Irving. He was injured, and then Mike Evans was out with a hamstring injury as well. This game was not only a battle of the revived quarterbacks, but it was a battle of the Buckeye receivers on top of that. Jackson Smith-Njigba went off for 8 catches, 132 yards, and a touchdown. He is second in the NFL in receiving, just behind Puka Nacua, but the rookie, Emeka Egbuka, or as Rob Gronkowski likes to say,
Emeka Egbuka,
had 163 yards and a touchdown. I cannot believe he said that on national television. Come on, Gronk. Do you not study name pronunciations? Insane. Anyway, it was somehow Emeka Egbuka's best game in what's been one of the most impressive rookie seasons we've ever seen from a wide receiver. Puka has the record for the most receiving yards by a rookie with 1,486, but Egbuka is currently on pace for 1,513. We'll see if he can actually break it. There's still a lot of season left, but it's safe to say the Bucs found themselves yet another star receiver in the draft. Now, this next game was quite the upset as the Patriots took down the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football. Costly turnovers were too much to overcome in the end for this normally high-powered Bills offense. You had Josh Allen. He threw a bad pick in the red zone. They had a botched handoff with Dalton Kincaid in motion. Then Keon Coleman also fumbled in Bills territory. And that's not to mention the 11 penalties that they had. But give credit to New England because they shut down James Cook almost completely. He had only 49 yards on 15 carries, and they did enough offensively to come away with the win. Drake Maye didn't actually score any touchdowns himself, but he did just about everything in between the 20s and kept making great throws to keep the chains moving. He was pushing the ball down the field with a lot of success. On throws of 10 or more air yards, listen to this, he was 8 of 10 for 149 yards. Pretty good. Stephon Diggs was the story of the night for that offense, though. In his first game returning to Buffalo, Diggs went off for 146 yards on 10 catches. That was the most receiving yards he's had in a game since 2022. One of the plays of the night was when Drake Maye looked like he was about to take a sure sack, but while he was being dragged to the ground, he somehow was able to get the ball out to Stephon Diggs for a first down. And that was a huge moment very late in this game. It actually helped set up the go-ahead field goal with just 15 seconds to go, which was not a chip shot, by the way. It was a 52-yarder, but the rookie kicker, Andy Borealis, sent it right down the middle of the uprights for the Patriots W. This was one of the most shocking outcomes of the week for sure, and with the Eagles also losing to the Denver Broncos, it meant that there are officially no more undefeated teams left in the NFL. You know, this had to sting for the Bills too, because had they won this game, they would have broken the franchise record for consecutive home wins. Meanwhile, the Patriots won back-to-back games for the first time since the 2022 season, moving to 3-2. This is the first time they've had a winning record through their first 5 games since 2019, which goes to show you how much they've really struggled in the post-Brady era. But they've got their guy now in Drake Maye. Mike Vrabel is a heck of a head coach. And with this being Maye's first signature win, if you look at the rest of their schedule, they have some tough ones against teams like Tampa, then Buffalo, and maybe the Ravens. I don't know. But other than that, a lot of these games are very winnable here. And with that said, I do think the Patriots have a chance to sneak into the playoffs as a wild card team. They're probably not going to win the division, but either way, a great start for them. And they'll have to do that without backup running back and kick returner Antonio Gibson because he suffered a torn ACL in last night's game. Ramondre Stevenson is still the leader in that backfield, though, despite his early fumbling issues. Then second-round pick Travion Henderson figures to be more involved now as well. So hey, make sure to let me know your biggest surprises, good or bad, as well as your takeaways from these Week 5 games in the comments down below. And I know I didn't cover Monday Night Football between the Chiefs and the Jags, but since it's a Chiefs game, I'm going to break that down on my main channel tomorrow. So with that, I'll see y'all next time.